This is Duke University.
Sustainability is one of the key business leadership issues because it really represents a broad scale of issues that face modern corporations. Sustainability is around risk mitigation. Do you understand the major trends that are happening in the world and in society? And is your company thinking long-term about how to navigate that? It's also thinking about major changes in availability of commodities and costs of doing business, of license to operate. Can you operate in the market you want? So from a broader perspective, and it doesn't have to be titled sustainability, that concept that your corporation lives and operates in the context of a broader culture and in a broader environment is an important thing for senior leaders to think about. As I think about the biggest issues that affect business in the future, clearly there's a lot of them. And at a company like UPS that operates in 200 countries in every state in the U.S., that drives thousands of vehicles that emit carbon, we have a lot of areas of interdependence and exposure. So certainly on the environmental front, we're all wrestling with the changes in the world, the risks of climate change. And so one of the key areas that we focus on, not surprisingly, is how do we manage to operate in a way that's more carbon friendly? How do we innovate and adapt technology and changes? So that there's no question that a continual focus on both the evolution of technology and automation, on policy making that may or may not allow operations to work effectively, and on what we can do as a steward of the environment is critical. But it doesn't just end with environment. It's also, as UPS expands across the globe into emerging markets, there's tremendous both risks and opportunities there. And that's where some of our sustainability efforts migrate very much more into being a positive force in the societies that we invest in. One of the areas of enlightened self-interest, I guess, that has been an interesting for us one is, what part of our growth strategy is to target emerging markets. And we have found that one of the big needs in emerging markets is getting medicines and healthcare distributed. And so part of our business strategy has been how do we better penetrate some of these markets? And we've been able to align some of our philanthropic efforts, working with some of the great medical companies and working on getting temperature-controlled goods distributed into jungles where they wouldn't normally survive. So these issues begin to blend, and sustainability to me is a broader kind of corporate responsibility. I often get the question, especially from some of the NGOs and sustainability advocates, will Wall Street ever get it? Will they ever care about sustainability? And I guess I kind of have good news and bad news on that front. Let me start with the bad news. The bad news is that there's not a heck of a lot of focus put on sustainability by investors, bottom line. So if you ask an investor, do they dramatically change their investments based on sustainability, the vast majority will say no. There are some limited, certainly socially responsible funds, but it is just not a big issue when framed in those terms. But as I said, there's a silver lining to this case also. And if you frame this question a little differently, you may get a different answer. So if you ask investors, do you absolutely invest based on sustainability? The answer would be no. But if you begin to think about what do investors value, do they invest and do they value companies that think of them over the long term and build long-term strategies? The answer is yes. Are they concerned about risk mitigation? Do they want to invest in companies that understand the broad context of the business that they operate in and those risks that could derail the business? Absolutely. And do they want to invest in companies that maintain a positive brand and a good reputation? Absolutely. So when you think about the components of what a well-run company is that practices sustainability, there actually are a lot of positive brand attributes around that. So the problem is we have two different groups speaking two different languages to some extent. So investors do care about quality companies, and ultimately those that operate and think about risks and are able to adapt will have a lower cost of capital. So it's less risky for me to invest in a company that is effective in sustainability because they can mitigate risks and I'm confident they'll adapt. So ultimately, if you're doing sustainability right, you're trying to do things to mitigate the exposures without it being a huge financial burden, then you are increasing shareowner value. I think one of the things that you have to be when you're focused on sustainability and especially emerging technologies is humble. Our forecasts and some of our goals that we set 5 or 10 years ago, the world changes and what seemed like a good goal then may not be good now. One example is back when we first began to set our long-term targets, we were very optimistic about biojet fuel as a way to offset the huge carbon burn we have, and set some very aggressive targets for the renewable fuel for jets. But that market just hasn't evolved, and it's more than double the price of traditional. And as we looked at it, we began to say, okay, we set this target. We could make this target, but it would cost us X millions of dollars more to do that. Whereas if we invested maybe and put a few more alternative fleet vehicles on the road, it would be less money and provide a much better output. So that's one where we had to kind of acknowledge that the goals we set didn't make sense in that framework. And so ultimately it's a point at which you have to decide, has the market moved, have the conditions changed, so that even a very important goal needs to be adapted. But it does teach you one thing, and this is one of the big issues that we like to communicate for policymakers. It's best to set broad directions and targets and let the market and let business develop the solutions. So we do encourage politicians when we talk to them, if you set constraints on business or set targets, that's great, but try to be technology or solutions agnostic. Don't presume to legislate exactly how a goal gets met. Instead, issue a challenge to business and let the market and let the creativity of businesses define the best way to solve the problem. I've evolved into a leadership position. I never thought when I first started with UPS 37 years ago I would be wearing a suit and tie and driving a major multi-billion-dollar corporation. So what I've tried to do is to bring, wherever I can, a openness and a humanity to the corporate world, encouraging diversity in the broadest sense. And I think that's an important message in the future, because the future is going to be changing more and more rapidly. I'm becoming a dinosaur. I know it's hard for me to keep up with change, but the new generation coming fresh out of school here will live in a world of more and more change. And the only way that organizations and people can adapt to change is by encompassing new ideas. And so I think the leaders of the futures will have to be more integrative than ever, learning from multiple perspectives, listening to more points of view, whether that's different nations, different disciplines, different functions, different technologies. And so hopefully my legacy, if anything, at the great company of UPS that I've worked at, is to encourage individuality and encourage people to celebrate their strengths and bring together multiple perspectives. So I think that's one of the most lasting legacy, if you can impact and help people continue to prosper and advance.